Everyone has that one thing in life that they absolutely love. For some, it might be their smartphone or computer. For others, it might be a certain food or perhaps a place. Those are all fine things to love. But if I had to choose something that I truly loved in life, it would probably have to be books. I know what you may be thinking. Books? Who would love books more than their phone or computer? Well, I grew up in a time before those luxuries existed. Computers were starting to become more and more integral to our society, but unless you had the means to acquire one, you just had to go without. Even still, computers back in those days weren't as streamlined as today. For most of my childhood, I didn't have very many friends. We lived in an area that didn't have very many children in it, so finding company was difficult. As a result of this, I ended up throwing myself into my school studies. I still hated school, but I did get pretty good grades. One year, my teacher asked us to go to the local library and select a book for a book report. Even though it was many years ago, I still remember how intimidating the building looked as I entered it. The exterior had large, ornate engravings into the stone walls. A statue of a lion stood stoically adjacent to the large wooden doors. The door opened with a slight hiss, as a gust of air bellowed out from within. The smell of wood and dusty paper filled my nose as I entered. Through the eyes of a child, this library appeared endless in design. Rows upon rows of books lined every wall, shelf, and some were even stacked upon desks. I was in awe of this place as I hadn't previously stepped foot in a library before. I was at a loss for words and I wasn't sure where to go. Then, an old man peered up from an old worn counter. He greeted me with a grin, some teeth absent in places. Patchy tufts of white hair clung to his balding scalp. He adjusted his large glasses upon his face as I approached. I told him I had been tasked with a book report and that I needed to choose a book. The old man looked me over for a bit, before giving me a slight nod. He led me to a bookshelf and his fingers gingerly tapped along the spines of multiple books. After a few moments, his hand came to rest upon one in particular, and he handed it to me. The cover had a large man standing behind a boy who was grabbing what appeared to be a wheel of a ship. In large, bold letters in the corner of the book, the words "Treasure Island" were written. I thanked him and was about to leave before he called me back. "You need a library card to check that out," he said. I frowned as I didn't have one, but he just grinned and walked back over to his counter. He retrieved a small paper card and told me to fill out my name. I obliged. With a single swift motion, he stamped the book and handed it to me. "Don't forget to return it when you're finished," he said. I nodded and left. Treasure Island was just the first of many books I've read during my lifetime. From fantasy to sci-fi, horror to mystery, I've enjoyed all the genres. Well, not so much the romance novels, but you get the idea. About halfway through the school year, my father had gotten a promotion at his job. Upon accepting, we had to relocate a few states away to accommodate his new position. I resented him for it, but slowly overcame it as seemingly every month he'd come home with a brand new book for me to read. After high school, I had gotten a job in a nearby city, and I myself had moved to be closer to my job. Even though I still loved to read, my life quickly got in the way of that. Where I once used to be able to read every single night, eventually it became every other week, then every other month. Before I knew it, I had stopped reading altogether. As the years went on, my performance at work ebbed and flowed. I was frequently tired. People got on my nerves often. To basically sum it up, I was unhappy. In all my years working at the same company, I hadn't once taken a sick day nor a vacation. I honestly had no desire to. Until a couple days ago, that is. I had forgotten to file a few reports during the week, and my boss was livid to say the least. After an hour of him shouting at me, I submitted to take an entire month of paid time off. I had the time, and I desperately needed a break. Since the way my job works, all time off requests go through upper management, not necessarily my boss, so it was approved by the end of the day. Upon leaving work that day, I felt a weight fall from my shoulders as I sauntered over to my car. It was the first time in a while since I had an abundance of free time. As I was driving home from work, my eye caught the glimpse of a strangely familiar stone building. I rubbed my eyes as best I could, trying to maintain a hand on the steering wheel. I looked closer, and there it was. The same library from my youth. I was surprised, to say the least. This obviously wasn't the same building. It couldn't be. But maybe they used the same architect, I thought. Either way, I felt a childlike sense of wonder build as I pulled my car over. I walked up the steps, past the slightly worn lion statue, and entered through the wooden doors. That same familiar scent hit my nose, and I felt a wave of peace pass through me. I began walking through aisles looking for a book I might like to read. Like I've said, I've read mostly every genre, so deciding on what to read next was always challenging. Before I could decide, a voice greeted from behind.
Ah, welcome back. Do you need assistance?
I turned and my jaw fell open slightly. Standing in front of me was that same old man from my childhood. Have you ever seen something so impossible that your brain simply can't process it? Well, that was happening to me. As if on autopilot, my response was limited. "I'm looking for a book?" I said.
Here, try this one.
He spoke softly, handing me a black book with no title. I looked it over and asked more about it. The old man remained quiet for a few moments before saying,
It's one you've read before, but still worth it.
My mind drifted back to Treasure Island, but this book looked completely different. I gave the old man a slight nod and began to leave when he stopped me once again.
Do you have your library card?
He asked aloud. At that moment, I knew this was no mere coincidence. I turned back and told the old man that I must have forgotten my card at home. He just returned a familiar grin, and with a snap of his fingers, a card appeared in his hand. He gently handed it to me and I looked it over. It was the same card I had as a kid. I was sure about it. By that point, I just wanted to get out of this episode of Twilight Zone and get home. I turned to leave and the old man said one more thing before I left.
Try not to finish it too quickly.
And with that, I left. After arriving home, I tried my best not to think about what had happened, but as I set my bag on the counter, the small black book tumbled out and landed with a hollow thud. I picked it up and read the first page. It talked about a woman named Mary, who was about to have a child. I thought it was funny because Mary is my mother's name. I read for a bit and she finally had a baby boy. His name was Nathan. I stopped for a moment, wondering if the old man had played some kind of trick on me. Though, after reading for a bit, I quickly realized what this book was about. It was about my entire life. I was both horrified and morbidly curious at the same time. I couldn't seem to break my eyes from the pages. The old man was right. I had read it before, but not like this. Page after page contained thousands of memories. Learning to ride a bike, graduating school, my first kiss, my first job. Every event in my life had been cataloged in this book. Before I knew it, the sun had diminished and I found myself in my study hunched next to my desk lamp, rapidly scanning the pages. My childhood turned into my teen years, followed next by my adult life, and I was quickly approaching my current life. A thought began to worm its way into my mind. What comes after? Is it possible I could see into my own future just by reading it? Finally, I turned the page and found myself in the book, sitting there reading this book. I chuckled at the thought. And just as I did, I read the same exact reaction. I turned the page and read the words, "There was a sudden knock on the door." Not a second after I had read that, I heard a loud knock sound on my front door. I stood up and went to answer it, but when I did, there was nobody there. I thought nothing much of it, so I returned to continue reading. The next line in the book sent an icy chill down my spine. Even though Nathan answered the door, it was too late. It had already entered. Then I heard the floor creak outside my door and I immediately shut the book. I'm not sure what is out there or what is going to happen next, but I can't stop thinking about how few pages there are left in the book. And I can't stop thinking about what the old man said, about finishing this book too quickly.